Hola mi gente, MsMalcolmHughes here. Welcome back. Today we are going to be discussing the book Carmen and Grace. So let's get right into it. Carmen and Grace by Melissa Cas Aquino is a book about two cousins who are more like sisters, Carmen and Grace, who are pulled into an underground drug cartel, but they end up being the high branch leg of that cartel. And where we meet our characters, we meet them shortly after the death of Doña Durca, who is the Dundada, the big boss of this underground drug movement. And they're trying to figure out what's next for them. And with that, we have the two cousins, Carmen and Grace, and we get both of their sides of the same story. So we're dropped in with Carmen going to pick up a member of the DOD, the Daughters of Durca, who has long been sent away because she was in danger. So she's finally able to return back now. Everybody's around for the funeral of Doña Durca. And with that, we see that tensions are running high. We have Carmen and Grace, which Carmen keeps telling us that they're very close, but initially it's like, are you, sis? Are you as close as you think you are? So there is tension therein. Grace was the closest to Durca because it turns out that she was the one who was brought in by being underage, and Doña Durca's way too old for her son kind of takes her in, and grooming is the appropriate word here, and grooms her from a young age. Her mother was someone who was struggling with drug addiction, and the son was selling drugs to the mother, came to look for the mother one day. She wasn't home, but Grace was home, and he took her out to eat, and it's kind of history from there. So eventually Doña Durca moved her into the house, embraced her like she was her own, but it was always understood that she was there because of the connection to the son, even though they end up building a stronger bond. And Grace was the one who ended up bringing everyone else in. In essence, there are actually three main characters to the story. There's Grace, there's Carmen, but also Red plays a significant role as well. And Red is the person that Grace is going to pick up when we first get introduced to this book. And Red is also someone who just is a cornerstone of every key action throughout this book. She is Grace's essentially best friend, another daughter of Durca. There were a lot of pros and a lot of cons of this book, and I want to get into them. One thing I really loved was the introduction of the book. It felt healing. It felt authentic. We get one of the characters who is in prison. I won't tell you which one. And we're really watching her go through these exercises with this woman who is there trying to help them heal. And it's beautiful and profound, and it was some very deep things that were shared, and I just loved it. Like immediately from the page, you could tell that this was rooted in healing. I would also say this is a very feminist novel, but in the best way, women empowerment, and I just thought it was like so dope in those aspects. Again, the messaging is not forced down your throat. It's just the realistic life telling of these individuals and everything that they had to go through, and we get to see the beauty therein. I don't want to spoil it for you all. I did really enjoy that there are two different perspectives. So with Carmen, we have her going from the present time, going back in time. And then when it transitions, we get Grace, who's telling the story from the origin to modern day. And so we get to see it from both perspectives. And I will say this, some things that I was unclear about when I was reading initially from Carmen's perspective really became realized and clear when I was reading it from Grace's perspective. So for instance, for me, I was like, Carmen, you're saying that you and Grace are really close, but Grace is saying that you ended up being a shady bee, and you're only lucky that y'all go so far back that you're still breathing. And it's like, are you all as close as you say? Like, what is going on here? When we read it from Grace's perspective, going back and coming to the present, we better understand her frustrations with Carmen. And then just also how she expresses herself. Grace is an interesting one. Of the two tellings, Grace was my favorite, but you also need Carmen's counter experience to understand the whole picture. These two cousins are Boricuas. They are Puerto Ricans, raised in New York, specifically the Bronx. And so I love the history that the writer threw in of Puerto Rican history, African American history, also some little bit of like Indian spirituality. And I thought that it was well done. It felt natural, but I still felt knowledgeable. I would go and research some of the topics and the names that were being shared, and I thought that was really, really dope. The writing was good. This is a debut novel, but it felt good. I loved reading it, but with a debut novel and with this being like her first book, there were some cons, and you'll understand what I mean in a moment. So my question was, should Grace have been the one to introduce the story? And what I mean by that is we open up with one of the characters, but I was like, should it have been Grace, who's the first voice that we heard? Maybe, maybe not. I think it depends on who you become the most connected to. I think it would have been interesting and set a different tone if we had initially heard from Grace and what the losing of Doña Durca meant to her, but that's not what we get. And so that was interesting. I do think that we would have been better positioned to understand the complexities between Grace and Carmen if Grace would have originally opened the book. But it's a small con and really just a personal preference. So Carmen really struggles in this book to decide what to do. Should she stay with the daughters of Durca? Should she leave and go be with this romantic counterpart and have this family that he really wants? And she goes back and forth because this is the only family she's ever really known. Carmen and Grace didn't really have good mothers. Their fathers weren't around, and so they were raised by like grandmothers, and then they died, and so they were really on their own. And Grace is kind of the mother figure, so Carmen has really followed Grace without questioning for her entire life. And so the question becomes, like, once Doña Durca is dead, she's only there for Grace. So she's like, I never loved Doña Durca like Grace did. It was never about her for me. It was always about just being with Grace. And so she's going back and forth with getting out of the life, staying in the life. And it cost her in the end. And I wish that she would have made a decision faster. And I get that it's family and the only family she's known. But Grace was mistreating Carmen something wicked throughout this book, in my opinion. So I do wish that Carmen would have made better decisions early on. I think my one big con is that the story doesn't always feel clear. Like, there are a lot of secrets happening at the same time, and maybe that's the goal of the book with this underground secret society, but there's like so many different tensions happening at the same time that it's not always clear, like, where we are in the story. And like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it was intended to express the animosity that's happening between so many different players and the distrust and change that's happening with everyone since Doña Durca has died, and who will be the new person in charge, who will hold the power. But sometimes I did find them a little distracting. But I will say that when I would feel these frustrations, when it would switch to the other person's point of view and that information would be filled in, I did feel better. So eventually it did come together, and for me. But overall, I would say that the story was good. I did like the way that it all came together. It made sense. I did feel a sense of closure, and you don't always get that with books, especially when there are so many moving pieces. But there was still some aspects of like nobody else got in trouble, not like the resolution of it all. We got a bit of it and it was beautiful to see, but I wish we would have gotten more of like what actually happened to all the women. And in the end, like I said, we go back and forth between Grace. I really think that though this is Carmen's story and Grace's story, I think for me, I felt a stronger connection to Grace, so I wanted more of Grace. I would have liked Grace in the book, and in a way she does. But our final closing moments are with Carmen and Artemis, or the idea of Artemis. And I guess that makes sense based on the sacrifices that everyone has made, that those are the two standing and we get that final resolution. And I would say the final thing I liked is that we have the DOD and its daughters of Durca throughout, but then it also becomes daughter of Durga. And I want you all to read the story to really understand what that means. But it shows a spiritual transition and alignment that wasn't there before. And so I think we get that evolution and growth, which was beautiful. I also really love the story and background we got on Doña Durca and just her experiences, because she was making questionable decisions as well, and you were side-eyeing her. And just, I think understanding a person and their struggles and their context helps, their history. It still doesn't excuse it though, so I'm still side-eyeing Doña Durca. But overall, I really enjoyed this book more than I thought I would. I had hopes for it, but the way that it all came together and the conclusion, you know, I'm big on endings. So the fact that it was wrapped up nicely and we really did get to understand how all of the struggles impacted these women and the different choices that they made. And I really love that some people are real life struggling with what they did. It isn't wrapped in a pretty bow. These were difficult choices that they made, the life experiences that they've had. And I liked the humbleness. I liked the self-awareness and the self-reflection. I liked the constant striving and going with life and the like punches it through at you and everything therein. So I actually really ended up enjoying this book quite a lot. I initially was reading it online. I checked it out from my library, had an ebook version, and I enjoyed it so much when I finished that I bought it because I wanted it in my collection. So with that being said, that's a huge statement by itself. But I do want to let you all know, based on my scale of read now, read when you have time and read when you want, I would definitely say this is a read when you have time. I did really enjoy it and I did add it to my collection. I don't know if everyone would feel the same way about it, but I think it's one that people should read for sure. And I'm looking forward to more books coming out from this author. So I did really enjoy the work. That's it for me, y'all. I will have my what books I'm reading in April video coming soon. I'll also have my March wrap-up video coming soon, so look out for those. Tons of videos on the channel. I hope you all will stay tuned and check them out. Until next time, I am MsMalcolmHughes, one who believes that books are sometimes better than people. And until the next one, please remember to give time, to be kind to each other, and to have the very best day of your life on purpose. Peace, odabo, adios, ciao.